Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. I would like to thank first Gérard Mestralet for having asked me to do this. I didn't expect to have such a short night last night, so you have to bear with me. Forgive me. So, when I started to prepare this, it came to me that 2017 had been a wonderful year for Europe as far as growth is concerned. Definitely, and we saw it in indicators, in the mood actually of some European people, and it was good to see that after the terrible financial crisis we've been through. Yet, this first quarter, if anything, has been a little bit disappointing as far as growth is concerned. Private activity indicators are, yes, pointing to, a gathering of pace for the Eurozone growth. A rebound is on the cards. The ECB president, Monsieur Draghi, 2 days ago seemed pretty confident about it. The ECB actually has a path that points out to their confidence in some economic rebound in Europe. And at the same time, like I said, this first quarter has been sort of tepid. If you were looking at indicators in France yesterday, production, industrial production, manufacturing output, very disappointing. And of course, we have, it was over there, this hostile environment, this disruptive environment we're discussing. And the threats are piling up. This morning, China said it would retaliate after a second wave of additional tariffs by the US administration on Chinese goods. We have the Brexit, which looks like it's happening, contrary to what some thought. You have also higher oil price, geopolitical tremors everywhere, within Europe as well. I'm thinking here about Hungary, Italy, Poland. It's a bit difficult. So in such a current, unclear background, there are obvious answers. Underlying strength within Europe, but they need to be unleashed. And if we are discussing about this here, it's because it's not happening yet, I think. With me to discuss this, Lorenzo Binismaghi, who's the chairman of Société Générale. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. We also have Ambroise Fayol, who's the vice president of the European Investment Bank. We're very fortunate, very, very fortunate for us Europeans who keep at looking at ourselves, who are very kind of self-centric, I would say, to have someone from outside, Wang Jingdong, who's the senior executive vice president of the International and Commercial Bank of China. And last but not least, we have Martin Merlin, who's the director of the Regulation and Prudential Supervision of Financial Institutions, forgive me, it's a mouthful, at the European Commission. Let me kickstart this session with Mr. Binismaghi. Did I describe it well, Mr. Binismaghi? In what world do we live in?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me. The question is, we had a soft first quarter. Is it the turning point, or is it a soft patch, as some would describe it? That's the key question we have to assess the current economic environment. To be sure, in the medium term, we have some clouds. The trade issues are a concern. The overall geopolitical environment is also a concern. And in any case, the end of this long phase of recovery in the US is going to sooner or later to happen. And the tax cut may only have delayed of a couple of years this phase. But when we look more at the short term, the variables, the factors of growth are still there. I think monetary policy remains very accommodative. We heard the governor earlier, certainly more accommodative in Europe than in the US. Fiscal policy in Europe is less restrictive than in the past. not as expansionary in the US, but rightly so, I think, in Europe. But it's not restrictive. Oil prices, I think, remain moderate. There is an issue, an uncertainty, but about geopolitical tensions. But I think so far, around $70 per barrel, it remains a factor which does not hamper growth. The exchange rate of the euro is relatively favorable. And I think the overall sentiment, in particular in France, is quite positive. If I can add to macro numbers, some micro experience, going around France as a banker, I am struck to see the favorable attitude by entrepreneurs, and I'm struck that when I ask them what is the main concern that you have, they nearly unanimously say it is the lack of skilled labor. So they would like to grow more, and the lack of skilled labor is a problem. So this shows that reforms are starting to work in France and in other parts of Europe. So my personal assessment would be to say that it is a soft patch, but we should not, so that growth will continue, but we should not underestimate the clouds and the concerns and the geopolitical issues, both in the US, but also in Europe. In 1 year time, we have the European elections, and running to these elections, we know, as the governor said, many things have to happen. Will they happen? Will we go forward towards banking union, capital markets union, growth initiatives? That remains a key question mark.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Merlin, you were sitting next to me. I was just wondering, is the European economy really recovering? There's a lot of things that are being done right now at your level, the European Commission. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, on growth, we share Lorenzo's analysis. We expect growth to remain strong in 2018, although moderating slightly as monetary stimulus is gradually withdrawn, and also as global trade growth eases. Beyond this year, we remain optimistic, but we do see some negative external shocks on the upside. Of course, trade tensions and also overheating in the US, which can lead to stronger than assumed monetary policy reactions. So against that background, we have to pursue a number of efforts at European level. In the Juncker Commission analysis, investment was seen as absolutely crucial in order to enhance our long-term growth potential. And we think that this remains valid today and will remain valid for the next Commission. That is why we need to continue our efforts in the framework of the investment plan and the European Fund for Strategic Investment, so that innovative projects in particular get the funding that they need going forward. We also need to foster more structural reforms in Europe. That is why we have proposed for the next long-term budget between 2021 and 2027 a reform support program in order to help member states that need more structural reforms in areas like product labor markets, education, taxation, the business environment. 25 billion euros should be available in order to provide technical and financial support for member states in need of more structural reforms. One area where that program will be active is the area of capital markets, and that brings me, of course, to the Capital Markets Union. We strongly believe that we need to continue giving a strong push to the Capital Markets Union project because we need more equity financing in Europe. The governor has underlined this in the morning. We need more integration of capital markets at European level in order to have a better allocation of savings throughout the EU. And we also need more integrated capital markets in order to be better able to distribute losses across the economy in case of adverse shocks. So we need capital markets to do a better job at sharing risks. We've done some progress on Capital Markets Union in this Juncker Commission, but clearly we will need more engagement, more commitment from the member states in particular in order to really have a fruitful structural reform in EU 27 in this field. It will be, of course, particularly important having Brexit in mind because, as you know, the outcome of the negotiations remain extremely uncertain. And given that, we will need strong capital markets at local level, but also at EU integrated level in the EU 27.
Thank you very much. So, Ambroise Fayol, Mr. Merlin just mentioned the CMU, he mentioned the need for investment. You have your hands right into it at your institution. And I'm just asking, it's been nearly 3 years now since the Juncker plan has been, the Juncker, forgive me, Mr. Juncker, plan has been put together to boost investments in Europe. So can you tell us where it stands as far as you are concerned? Can you tell us how much has been invested? And can you tell us if is that really efficient?
I have the feeling you have some doubts.
Well, I have mauvais esprit this morning. Forgive me. Go ahead.
Ça c'est vrai. Well, let me just say at the beginning, EIB is the Bank of the European Union. It's a public bank. Our shareholders are the member states of the European Union. And we are investing in EU priorities. When Jean-Claude Juncker came at the European Commission, together with EIB, the European Commission and us, we had the strong recommendation that we needed to boost investment, and that the problem was not the lack of money available. The problem was the difficulty to take risks. And this is why we have put in place this fund called, as an acronym, FC, so the European Fund for Strategic Investment. In the day-to-day life, it is called the Juncker Plan, to boost investments. And the guarantee fund that has been set by the European Commission and by EIB is 21 billion euros. And the prospect was, over the period of time of 3 years, to boost 315 billion euros of additional investment in Europe. So where are we today? I mean, we are close to the 3-year end, and we are at 94% of the objective. Now, what is interesting for us is not necessarily only the quantitative target, it's also what we have financed and where. What we have financed is in particularly 4 sectors: the support to SMEs, innovation, energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, and the digital economy. And when I say digital, to give you an example, what we finance is projects that are not in big urban areas where we think the private sector is very well equipped to do that. It's more to support the development in less populated areas. In terms of geographies, naturally the bigger countries have got more in terms of growth figures. France, Italy, and Spain are the first beneficiary countries of the Juncker Plan. But when you look into that in terms of the size of the GDP, the first beneficiary country of the Juncker Plan is Greece. And in the 10 first beneficiary countries from the Juncker Plan, you have 9 countries that are in Eastern Europe or in Southern Europe. The only exception is Finland. So from that standpoint, we think we have achieved our objective to boost investment in riskier projects in key sectors of the economy for the future, and especially in geographies that had been even more hit from the crisis in terms of investment. Now we are very pleased that the political authorities of the European Union, the Parliament and the Council, have decided to prolong the Juncker Plan and to add 200 billion euros of additional investment expected by end 2020. And we are very, very pleased with that. I'll come back later maybe on what we think about the investment situation in Europe seen from the EIB. And there are very interesting things that have been said this morning by the governor or by Lorenzo and Martin.
Don't worry, I have more questions for you, Monsieur Fayol. Thank you very much. We're so fortunate to have someone from outside that is going to perhaps cast an interesting light on what Europeans are currently doing, and from a mighty country, which is China. Mr. Wang, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm really interested to find out, with all these efforts that everyone here is making in Europe, everyone is agitating oneself at the European Commission level, at the Parliament level, at the banks level, at the national authorities level. Seen from China, from outside, what is it that the Europeans are doing well to boost their growth? And what is it that they're not doing so well? If you don't mind helping us to have some sort of a different eye on what we do here.
谢谢主持人，很好的问题。正如主持人刚开始讲到的，欧洲的经济，今年一季度有所放缓。但是呢，总体来说呢，是欧债危机以后经济的复苏性增长，我们对欧洲经济的增长感到欣慰，也感到乐观。这种增长来源于哪里呢？一个呢是欧洲的基础设施投资的增长，第二个呢是消费的增长，还有对外合作的扩大，我想原因是这样。那么欧洲呢优势呢，从我们看来呢，这个一个是我们很好的营商环境，这个从全球放眼来看欧洲是一个非常难得的，有非常健全的基础设施和这个基于规则的这样一个营商环境，这是我们非常好的优势。第二个呢是我们创新的优势，当然我们也有不足，后面我们还要谈到。第三个呢是基于规则的开放，欧洲呢对外开放的这个传统是非常好的，特别是法国这些方面应该说还是走在前面。那么我们怎么看这个未来欧洲的发展呢？我们觉得这个第一个还是要加强欧洲的团结和合作。我们也感受到欧洲各国内部的这个经济竞争，我觉得这是良性的竞争，这是良性的竞争。包括英国脱欧的问题，在欧盟谈判，在一些具体的问题上在协调，这也是实际上也是一种竞争。这种竞争呢，对于我们欧洲的发展是有好处的。但是这种竞争呢，归根结底还是要团结，发出欧洲统一的声音，共同对外呢，这个一个声音说话，对外加强合作。这是我想的一个方面。第二个方面呢，就是发挥我们欧洲的这种创新优势加大创新力度。刚才我记得我们主席讲的一个问题，就是我们的风险投资和美国相比，有所减弱。这就是我们在创新方面投入力度不够，包括互联网的发展、支付的发展，从全球范围来说，欧洲相对来说有所落后，这是我们不足的地方。 那么因此呢，我们要利用我们传统的优势，加大创新力度，加大对外基于规则的开放和合作。那么这种开放和合作的下面我们还会详细谈到，就是中欧的合作和中欧在“一带一路”这样一个交汇点的合作，是未来发展极其有潜力的地方。我去年到欧洲别的国家去的时候，他们对这一点也非常感兴趣。这个话题我们留在后面再说。谢谢。
谢谢你。Now, to any one of you who would like to answer this one, if we hear, and if we are asking ourselves that question, I mean, nothing is rosy. It's not all rosy, all pink, we're fine. There is something of an issue. Couldn't it be that we have a structural problem here in Europe? Too many countries? Too many national regulations? Too many administrative constraints? We are too technical? Are Europeans their worst enemies as far as growth is concerned? Mr. Binismagi.
Well, but when you ask this question, you start from the assumption that Europe has grown less than other areas, which is not the case. If you take the last 20 years, so it's a very long time, since the start of the euro, and you compare the United States with the euro area, per capita, so you take out population growth, because we know that we have a problem which is clearly identifiable. And if we could change that, it would be easy. But if you take per capita growth, so over the last 20 years, the United States per capita has increased overall by about 22%, and Europe 18%. So only 4 percentage points less. And when you look at these 4 percentage points, they happened in 2 years only. 2012, 2013. The crisis that Europe had in these 2 years, that did not happen in the US, nor in England, nor in other parts of the world. If you take out these 2 years, the rest, Europe has done as well as the US. So this is not to say that it's enough, but certainly we have been competitive. So one of the key issues is to understand what happened in these 2 years. Europe was fragile, its institutions were fragile. Investors thought that the Eurozone would explode. So we have to solve this problem first. We have partly addressed it. We have created the European Stability Mechanism, part of the banking union. The ECB has done the whatever it takes. We should ask ourselves, is this enough to eliminate the risk of a new shock affecting Europe that really creates a disruption as big as that? My answer is no. We have to complete the architecture. If we do that, will this be enough? Well, I think if we do that, it's a big thing, because this will create the confidence that the Eurozone is there to stay. And of course, if you fix that, this will give strength to the Eurozone to grow. And as I mentioned, growth of the Eurozone over the last, after the crisis, for instance, since 2013 to 18, the Eurozone has done even better than the United States. The second problem that we have is that growth, on average, is not growth everywhere. And we have had growth very strong in some countries, in Germany, Finland, the Netherlands, and in other countries, France, Italy, slower. So we need to reduce the divergences. But this is largely the responsibility of the member states to make their countries more competitive. When we talk about the judicial system, the public administration, the labor markets, these are national competences. And as I think our Chinese colleague said, he said something very interesting, that competition is good between countries. We have to make this competition within a mechanism of solidarity. So I think we should be grateful that you are mentioning this from the outside. Europe still needs to be a bit more competitive and a bit more solidary. I think these are the two areas where we need to work more.
Monsieur Fayolle.
We do every year a survey. We ask 12,000 entrepreneurs in non-financial institutions in Europe about their perception and intentions in terms of investment. And one of the very interesting questions in this survey is what is preventing you from investing more? And we are an institution where you have 15% of the entrepreneurs that are surveyed who are saying we invest too little. The answers are interesting because they are not related to primarily to business regulation or to labor market regulation. The first one is difficult to assess. This is uncertainty. And maybe it is related to some extent to regulatory uncertainty, but that is not good for investment. But I think it's broader than that. But the second one, which is very close, is difficulty to find staff with the right skills. And so we are back to an issue that is vital for Europe, which is in order to allow Europe to grow faster, we need to invest more in education and vocational training. We do that in a way through our programs of, for example, trying to modernize the schools and universities throughout Europe, but it has obviously to go beyond that, and that's also an issue for governments. Now, when you look at the issue on a longer-term perspective, innovation seems key in terms of future investment. We are making progress. Actually, investment is recovering in Europe, and it is led by corporate investment, and that's good news. What is clear also is that the world is not waiting, and that other regions are also making a lot of investment in innovation. So we need to continue our efforts to boost innovation.
Let me cast my eyes to the other side of the Atlantic. Tax cuts. They're obviously doing wonderfully for the growth rate in the US. Aren't we too dogmatic in Europe regarding debt and deficits? Then shouldn't we have more favorable fiscal stimulus, Monsieur Merlin?
Well, I'm not so sure that I can answer that question. I think a priority is rather to solidify the euro area, as Lorenzo said. I think he referred to the governance of the euro area, and in particular to banking union, which needs to be strengthened. We see this as a priority in order to strengthen confidence in the eurozone, in our currency. And to do that, we need to continue cleaning up balance sheets of banks in a number of countries, and we need to continue reducing the stock of NPLs in a certain number of countries. I mean, that is happening, but it needs to continue. And we also need more risk sharing within the euro area in order, in particular, to break for good the doom loop between sovereigns and banks. And for that, we need notably a very credible backstop to the Single Resolution Fund. We see this as a major priority in political discussions in the coming months.
Thank you. But let me then ask. So you're not willing to engage into this, but Mr. Binismaghi, I'm asking you.
We tend always to have a complex, in Europe, a complex of inferiority with the US. we always tend to think that they are doing the right things and we are doing the wrong things. But I think in fiscal policy, when the economy is doing well, the fiscal policy should be preparing the ground to be helpful when things go wrong. So we should reduce the debt and the deficit in good times so that when the next recession comes, we can use the fiscal instrument. So the question to the Commission would be, will we be able to use the fiscal instrument the next time the recession will be around, which maybe was a problem in 2008, 9, and 2012. If I look at the US, I am really concerned because they have a fiscal deficit of over 5% of GDP, a debt which is going towards 115% of GDP in 2025. When the next recession will come, what will happen to the fiscal situation? I would be concerned looking at the US. I think in Europe we're going the right direction. Monetary policy is helping. So hopefully we will strengthen the recovery so that monetary policy can become a bit tighter because, as you know, banks like higher interest rates, at least a steeper yield curve.
If I may just to follow up very briefly, I was a bit embarrassed because your question is more a question for some member states than for the European Commission. But it is fair to say that if we look at certain member states, there is some fiscal space in order to have a more proactive fiscal policy. And the Commission would welcome that coming from a certain number of member states in order to reduce imbalances within the euro area in particular.
Thank you very much. So we have to reform, we have to invest more. Some countries have some room for a more favorable fiscal policy. Could also one of the solutions to accelerate growth in Europe come from outside? And I'm not talking about the US here, I'm talking about, for instance, China. Mr. Wang, there's this Belt and Road Initiative that President Xi Jinping put together. You are a mighty Asian investor in Europe, and I would be very interested to find out about your plans. Do you see Europe as a very favorable environment for your investments? Can you say a little bit more about that, please?
谢谢。当然，首先我想重复的是，欧洲的投资环境当然是很好的。我们需要的是欧洲进一步扩大开放，促进双向投资的发展。所谓双向投资呢，就是中方到欧洲来投资，欧洲向中方投资。关于这个问题呢，我想有3个方面。第一个呢，欧洲的基础设施本身需要升级建设，因为本身欧洲的基础设施发展不够平衡，传统的西欧地区有更新的需要。中东欧地区呢，有进一步和欧洲互联互通的需要。这项我想大家可能会同意这个看法。在这个方面呢，可以合作。当然，基础设施建设呢，一个呢是要以规划为基础，就是要做好规划；另一方面呢，要在财务做根据，进行财务上的这个论证和测算，使得我们基础设施的建设呢，建立在可行的基础上，财务可行的基础上。当然，这个财务可行不一定使私营企业一定能赚钱，但是这里面就是要算清楚，政府需要补贴多少钱，把它做得透明起来，使得公众能够接受。这是我说的第一个问题，就是欧洲自身的基础设施建设，中方和欧洲有很大的合作空间。第二个结合点呢，就是“一带一路”地区的这个合作。这个首先是“一带一路”地区的基础设施建设，这个需求量非常大，同样也要做好规划和财务工作。另一方面呢，“一带一路”地区的产能合作，特别是通过产能合作带动欧洲的建筑商、成套设备的，还有金融和服务业的需求是非常大的。 在这些方面，特别是金融服务和服务业的，包括咨询、会计师、律师方面的服务，欧洲是有非常强的优势的，啊，而中国呢，在这个项目资源、客户资源、前期工作方面有一定的优势，啊，这是我们在“一带一路”方面的合作。第3个合作呢，就是中国扩大这个开放，希望欧洲到中国投资。中国目前呢，就是这个清洁能源、环境保护、扶贫、旅游这些基础设施的建设有非常大的需求。各位到中国去呢，基本上到的是像北京、上海这样的大城市，感觉到和欧洲的区别不是很大。但是实际上，我们广大的这个中西部地区和农村地区这个潜力非常大，基础设施很落后，清洁能源和环境保护的要求非常高，需求非常大。在这里呢，我也向各位报告呢，工商银行在“一带一路”地区那么有20个国家，有129个机构，在这个提供金融合作方面呢，也有一定的条件和基础。我们已经支持中国360多个项目，承诺贷款1000亿美元，这些都在进行当中。当然，我们在做这些当中呢，我们都要考虑到它的财务可行性，考虑到它的金融风险，这些问题都是我们在这个支持融资的时候非常重要的考虑因素。我们绝对不是说把这个钱就拿出去，就不管它的这个能不能还款，这一点呢，我想我们是非常重视这一点的。我就说这些，谢谢。
谢谢你。Monsieur Fayol, you were willing to talk a little bit more about what you are doing at the EIB in terms of investment. So obviously you're not going to, are you helping actually small and medium-sized companies investing in China, since European growth can, according to Mr. Wang, also occur in China? What is it that you're doing? Sorry.
The EIB is mostly investing within the European Union, but 10% of our activity is outside, and including in China, where we are co-financing projects mostly in energy efficiency and renewable energy sectors. This is what we do most in China. What we do in Europe to support SMEs, SME is one of the 4 key sectors for us in terms of activity, and we do year after year more or less 20 billion euros of loans for SMEs in Europe, and it goes in different ways. It can be risk sharing, as Martin said, is very important, especially in countries that have suffered from the crisis, where the banks have suffered most from the crisis. And that's something that we do in particular, for example, in Italy, where we take part of the risk on a portfolio of SMEs for a bank to develop a new portfolio of loans. But what we do also is to support innovative SMEs. And that's something that is not well known, but thanks to the Juncker Plan, EIB has become one of the biggest venture debt funds in the world. And we are supporting many fast-growing, innovative SMEs where we think there is a huge potential and where we know there is a market failure in Europe, because these companies, when they come at a stage where they are closer to commercialization and industrialization, they cannot find enough financing, and the risk is that they are getting financing outside of Europe, which we think is not desirable. And we do a lot of this. This is also very interesting in terms of image of Europe and positive image of Europe, because we need to bring that to the European citizens. One example maybe of that. In South France, near Aix-en-Provence, we are financing a young company called Sun Partner, the CEO of this company has invented the way to have transparent photovoltaic glasses. Normally, photovoltaic glasses are dark. He has invented that. He needed 15 million euros for developing its research and also finding clients, and we have financed that. And when you discuss with this very interesting gentleman and ask about the support from Europe, was it important for you? What he says is, what I like is two things. The first one is, with this big loan at favorable conditions, you allow me to concentrate on what I should do, which is develop my business and find new clients, and not on finding money, which is something that I do because I have to. And the second thing is, you're a bank of engineers, and you challenge me on the business model that I was developing, and actually I have adopted it. And this kind of stories, we need to make them more known, because it also shows that Europe is really moving.
Europe is really moving, but is it moving fast enough, considering all the risks that are still weighing, all the uncertainties? Anyone?
Well, in terms of investment, I think we are catching up in terms of the situation that we had during the crisis, and clearly we are in the right direction. I also think that, to come back to one of your previous questions, everything is not going to come from fiscal resources. And actually, for developing investment, sometimes you don't need much more resources. And what you can lose is innovative ways of financing. And when you look at the way that the Juncker Plan is built, you have what we call first loss pieces. Very often, private investors say, we would like to do more, but the risk taken is too high. If you, as a public institution, you take the first loss piece, or if a budget takes the first loss piece, then the leverage can be very high. Juncker Plan, the leverage is 15. So with one public resource, you can have 15 of investment additional. And that's also something that shows that we also need to be a bit more innovative in the way to look at how to use fiscal resources. And that's what the Commission is proposing for the next fiscal period.
Monsieur Merlin.
Well, you asked the question, is Europe moving fast enough or not? I suppose it depends on the issues. One issue we haven't touched upon, which is very relevant for growth in the future, is of course the issue of innovation and innovation in the field of financial services in particular. And there I do think that we see a lot happening in the market with a lot of very promising fintechs in the EU, notably in the area of payments, with the arrival of open banking throughout the EU. So I think that Europe is well placed in this field, and this is an area where, interestingly, we have decided not to move too fast when it comes to regulation. And if you look at the action plan on fintechs that we produced a few months ago, we've come to the conclusion that there's no need for the moment, at least, to regulate that sector, that we should rather let it grow, let it develop itself, and just make sure that the existing rules are future-proof and will allow that sector to develop. So we place a lot of hope into that as a major driver for growth in the future.
One thing we didn't mention is part of the Juncker Plan was to allow some players to access investments, whereas they couldn't normally. We're just out from the financial crisis, and we didn't mention how banks are going to behave as far as the European growth is concerned in the future. Let me rephrase this, Mr. Binismaghi, because this question is for you. the banks, the European banks, seem to be behind their US. You're going to bash me for this one, but I'll have to ask it nevertheless. European banks seem to be behind their US counterparts at the end of the financial crisis. So what's preventing them from being more involved within the European economic environment? Could it be that regulations in Europe are too heavy? Could it be that they are too constrained as well? Could it be that the US sovereignty is weighing a lot on them? What's preventing a French bank, from, for instance, from being a lender of a French company abroad?
No, I mean, this is happening. But if I can start from your previous question, yes, Europe is too slow. Of course it is too slow. If we look in terms of how you prepare for the future, and if I look at what is happening in other parts of the world, obviously Europe is too fragmented. In order to invest for technology, in order to invest for the future, you need size. And in order to create size, you need to eliminate the barriers for growth, in particular within the single market. And if I take any sector, from the telecommunications to, and if you want to come to the banking, it's clear that we have still too many barriers to concentration and to having global players. So if you want to discuss banks, I'm willing to do that, but I would say it's the same for technology, it's the same for telecommunications. And I think I would say to my European Commission colleague, unfortunately in Europe, on top of the 28, soon 27 political cycle, we have the European political cycle. So now we have nothing happening for the next year, and probably for the next year and a half, because of the political cycle. But clearly what is needed in the area of going forward to eliminate fragmentation is happening too slowly. And this is true for the capital market. We are moving too slowly. It's not ambitious enough. And in the banking sector, we are actually risk of moving backwards. We have more and more pressure from the national authorities to put exceptions at the single regulations. We have pressure to try to bring back national regulators and take away power from the single supervisor. So, to your question, why, compared to the US, we have today, compared to 2008, US banks are bigger, and European banks, to some extent, are smaller. And why is that? I think because the regulation largely discourages the creation of European players which can compete with the American ones. And I think this is a question I would not only ask to the Commission, but also to the governor had it been here. I think the whole purpose of banking union was to, of course, to create more stability, more uniformity, but also less fragmentation, more integration. On this second objective, we are far, far away from the target. And my fear is that we are moving backwards instead of moving forward. So I think the private players, French banks, Spanish, and all the others all over Europe are ready to move forward, but when we look at the regulatory environment, it is discouraging. So I expect from the Commission, from the ECB, from all the authorities involved to look really at the obstacles for creating a more competitive capital market in Europe.
Thank you. Monsieur Merlin.
Very briefly to react to what Lorenzo said, I agree with most of what he said, although I would just add that if European banks are in difficulty vis-à-vis American banks, it has to do with the political and regulatory environment in the EU. It has to do also maybe with European banks in some respects, which probably can do a better job at becoming more efficient, at rationalizing their activities, and at, for example, embracing the digital world. This being said, I agree with what Lorenzo said. And here the political context is unfortunately not conducive to a high level of ambition. We are confronted with a situation with member states are more obsessed with making sure that we don't have another financial crisis, and with making sure that if there is a crisis, they can cope at national level with the consequences of the crisis, rather than at making the banking sector in Europe more integrated, more efficient, and making it easier for large banks in particular to manage capital and liquidity throughout the euro area. That is true. The Commission is making proposals in this field. Negotiations are taking place now in the Council and the Parliament. We place hope in the fact that the Parliament may take a more European approach on these issues, but I admit that it is difficult. But that has to do with reluctance in a number of member states rather than with what the ECB and the Commission are trying to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Merlin. So this is the end of our debate. Let me really briefly sum it up, because we're running out of time. So remember, I started to talk about the current environment with clouds piling up on the horizon. If we look at the topic of this panel, accelerating European economic growth, first of all, Monsieur Merlin here said we need to continue our efforts in investment plans. We need to have innovative projects. We need to foster structural reforms. We need to have a better integration of capital markets, more engagement. Ambroise Fayol from the European International Bank here said, who doesn't mind getting his hand dirty because they have a lot of little loans and investments, support to SMEs, said that one of the issues is actually the lack of skilled labor force, and this is something we need to really tackle, like better investment in education. That's the issue. Another priority also is to, for Monsieur Merlin, to strengthen the euro area rather than cutting taxes in the US. Remember, I was a bit cheeky in mentioning what's happening the other side of the Atlantic, where the fiscal stimulus is actually like quite enormous and is boosting the US rate growth. Well, it's not something that we should do. Monsieur Merlin did mention that some European countries do have the possibility to do so, and it would be very much welcome. But, like Mr. Binismaghi said, it might be a bit dangerous when you look at the deficits, the fiscal deficit and the debt in the US, which are actually getting to impressive levels. Sorry, forgive me for that. Mr. Wang here, we're very fortunate to have, gave us an outside look about what we're doing and mentioned something that is interesting, that we do present in Europe a favorable investment environment for Asian investors. He mentioned that China was very much interested in cooperation in output capacity, in financial services. He also mentioned that some of the European growth actually could occur in China itself. And indeed, Ambroise Fayol from the European Investment Bank mentioned that 10% of its activity is outside Europe and mostly in China. True, we have some problems here in Europe. It's too slow, too fragmented, too many barriers. There's the political cycle, which is a main issue for any sector of our economy. It's not just banks, but it's also telecommunications and whatnot. And yet, as Lorenzo Binismaghi said, we shouldn't be too hard on Europe. When we compare Europe, and I've been doing this since the start of this panel, when you compare Europe to the US, for instance, we can say that over the past 20 years, it has done roughly as good as the US, roughly, in spite of fragile start of the European currency, in spite of fragile institutions. It's still there and growing. And I would like to leave the last word to Mr. Wang, who's here, and I'm quoting him. As a trade war is looming, as the US president landed last night in Belgium, here's Mr. Wang's word that I would like to quote to conclude. What will help Europe, what is admirable about Europe, is its solidarity, its ability to speak with one voice on a global stage.